The warning went up from NASA immediately that should you come upon what looks to be a piece of debris from this, that because of the fuel involved and a whole other set of reasons, don't go near it. Certainly don't make physical contact with it. We've been joined by Bob Moulter, an eyewitness to this from Palestine, Texas, there in the eastern central part of the state of Texas. Mr. Moulter, thank you for your patience, and thank you for sharing your eyewitness account. There is a Pentagon angle to this today, only because when people first heard the word, there were, of course, initial fears and jitters that this might be the result of something else aside from a systemic catastrophic failure on board the shuttle itself. NBC News Pentagon correspondent Jim Miklaszewski is with us for what he's learning from there. Jim?
Brian, first of all, Pentagon officials stress that there's no indication that there was any external factor that would have contributed to what happened aboard the Columbia. And in fact, they point out that at the altitude and speed at which the Challenger was traveling, that there are no organizations, terrorist or otherwise, and even militaries who could actually intercept and try to shoot down the Challenger, I mean the Columbia, the space shuttle. So they are putting to rest any speculation that there was anybody out there who had the ability to shoot down the Columbia. As to what happened on board, of course, that's all open to speculation. But again, no indication that it's anything other than an accident. Also, we're told that at the time that the shuttle was streaking across North Texas, that one of the U.S. military spy satellites, it's essentially an early warning satellite that keeps track, keeps a look down on the Earth to detect any kind of missile launches or explosions. It could be a nuclear test somewhere. And it was this satellite, we're told, that detected a heat spike at about the same time and in the same vicinity as the Columbia was when the apparent accident occurred. There's no analysis yet of the data as far as we know, but there is an indication, at least from one U.S. military satellite apparently, that there was an explosion on board. As far as any kind of search and rescue, the only search and rescue helicopters, planes that would have been in the air at the time would have only been around the landing site, the recovery site there in Florida, or when the shuttles take off. So there were no U.S. military planes or helicopters in the North Texas area. And we're told that just a few minutes ago in this domestic conference that's underway to deal with this tragedy, that it's been pretty much decided that any cleanup, rescue, any kind of recovery efforts will probably now be turned over to FEMA. They'll be the coordinating agency in an attempt to gather up some of this hazardous material that you've been talking about. Most of the activity as of now, however, is at the local and state agencies. There is some thought that if the U.S. military was needed, that the governors in Texas and Louisiana may call up the National Guard, but there's no indication of that as of yet. As far as the U.S. military, its involvement in this is now being conducted by the North American Command out there in Colorado. This was the command that was created after 9/11. It's essentially a combination of several of the U.S. military organizations, NORAD, Space Command, Strategic Command, to engage in homeland protection from external forces. But at this point, they're getting involved directly in trying to piece together exactly what happened and to help in any way that they can the recovery of any of the hazardous debris that has fallen to the earth in North Texas and Louisiana. Brian?
And Jim, isn't it interesting? I'm sure it's not lost on you. Back in '86, when we lost the Challenger, the Pentagon did not come to mind instantly. It just, we would not think of the Department of Defense in this, and it was the first thing that came to mind today to a lot of people.
Well, interestingly, in the Challenger explosion, I was here in the Pentagon, and I walked into an office here in the building, and the generals already had the maps spread out and were plotting the search and rescue efforts that were already underway instantaneously. But again, that was on liftoff. So those assets are in place on liftoff and during recovery because it's felt that if there were an accident would occur just like an airliner, it may happen, it's most likely to happen then. Nobody obviously was anticipating this, so there would have been no U.S. military assets in the air in that region.
Jim Miklashevsky at the Pentagon, where he will remain gathering information for us all day. Mick, thank you for that.
Okay,
our next guest uttered the words magnificent desolation when he set his foot on the moon. Second man ever to do so as part of the crew of Apollo 11. Buzz Armstrong is with us from our Los Angeles Bureau. Oh, boy. There, I just merged the first and second Americans to set foot on the moon. You'll forgive me, Buzz Aldrin, for saying that. He's with us from our Los Angeles Bureau. And Buzz, can you expand on a point we were discussing with Jay Barbary? The steady stream of data that is sent back from this spacecraft really makes up a live, real-time equivalent of a commercial aircraft black box, correct?
That's right, it does. Until there is a loss of external communication, and of course the black box on board aircraft continues to record the control system positions and many other parameters on board right up to the point of the loss of power supply. And the same is true with the voice recorder, that if communication with the outside world is lost, the voice recorder continues to record what is going on in the cabin, independent of contact with the outside world, until the power supply to that voice recorder is terminated.
And Buzz, I don't want to get ghoulish here, but at this altitude, roughly 200,000 feet at this speed, roughly Mach 6, what's the heat level? What pieces? How much of the aircraft can survive?
Not any significant parts of the craft can survive. It would be fragments. The crew compartment, the pressure vessel, has an integrity that I think was demonstrated in the Challenger accident, that when a nearby catastrophic explosion took place, many portions of the shuttle came apart in pieces, but the crew pressure vessel, the crew cabin, did remain its integrity. On re-entry, the forces are considerably different for a prolonged period of time, and the heat load, depending on where in re-entry, is very considerable. So I don't think that once something began to come apart, that there are very many seconds of survivability left. The question is what kind of anticipation warning might the crew have had that things were going from bad to worse.
Buzz, we've never obviously had an incident on landing with this spacecraft before. You and I have spoken in the past about the project you've been interested in, kind of an alternative to the space shuttle, a different kind of space travel. Talk for a moment, if you will, about the viability. Here we are 113 missions into the space shuttle program after all.
Well, the shuttle is always being examined very, very closely for any potential wear or deterioration of its performance, and there is an entire program devoted to shuttle upgrades. And I just was in Washington recently speaking to General Mike Kostelnik about the long-range shuttle upgrade programs to prolong the life of the shuttle up through 2020 or beyond. A number of alternative proposals have been made as the shuttle goes through a maturing process. There's always been a consideration for whether an ejectable pod could be part of the upgrade that could contain the crew members as a more positive survivable mode than ejection seats. Ejection seats will only really work in the lower atmosphere and when the crew is protected after ejection from other very life-threatening devices.
And the whole theory only works when you have enough time to have warning, correct?
Well, yes, but warning conditions can be built into the reaction just like airbags for automobiles that react far faster than any human being could react to the onset of impact.
All right, Buzz Aldrin, who is these days the author of several best-selling books and, as you heard, a consultant on these projects, but of course best known. Sure.
Could I make a mention? I know I tried to mention this to the people covering this particular flight before it was launched, and it has to do with the presence of an Israeli astronaut on board. I'd like to remind the people that in 1985, before the launch of the Challenger, we did fly, as part of our Citizens in Space program, a Saudi prince who was a F-15 pilot, Prince Sultan. And he flew, of course, very successfully. And our entire program has been one, up to the Challenger accident, of exposing international passengers to the opportunities that we have.